Egypt, Burkina Faso, Cameroon, Mauritania, Mozambique, and Senegal, they've all experienced unrest, so to say, in recent weeks related to soaring oil, food and fuel prices. Mr. Johnson, do you think the governments have used the right methods in dealing with these protests?
Well, some of them have come really heavy-handed on the protesters, and I think that's wrong, really, because people are desperate, they're disillusioned, they're hungry, and of course when they're hungry they've got to resort to these sort of measures. They've got to listen to their people, because Africa is very, very poor, and of course the credit crunch, as we've seen across the world, is affecting all societies, and more so in Africa. And some of these communities who live on less than $1 a day have seen the price of their staple commodities, that is, mainly being rice or maize, triple, quadruple, 30–40% up. They can't afford them. So literally, you might as well say they're dead. Because if you can't survive, if you can't buy the basic stable commodity that you've been used to, then how else are you going to survive? So they're in a very desperate situation. Now, the government themselves do not know what to do. They need cash they don't have. They would ideally like to be able to have to feed their own people. They can't. Clearly, there's been lack of investment in the agricultural industry. Yes. They're stuck with the IMF in terms of loans. The IMF at the moment is struggling with cash. Yes. They're going through a crisis in their own, and they're in the bind altogether. So I would suggest that the African governments would have to look to the East for support. Financial packages, that is, be it India or China, and of course the European Union has a responsibility to increase aid at this vital junction. The AU, the United Nations, all need to do that. But again, the World Food Programme, which has been very successful thus far in assisting a lot of regions that have been desperate, find itself without food. It finds its resources down. It finds what's been available to it being because a lot of governments around the world have not been able to give as much as they would otherwise want to. And I would like to see these governments, being the African governments, take on a bit more responsibility in terms of fiscal policy. I'd like them to look into other means of getting income into their countries, supporting their people. But above that, they need to look at renewable sources of energy. The reliance of oil, the oil prices have gone up. They've got to look at solar, wind, and other means of bigger hydroelectric power to support their industries. And of course they've got to look at their tax system. The taxes have got to be reduced so that people can be able to afford the goods and services, and of course tariffs have got to be reduced. How else are people going to come in and trade with you? So it's a very complex situation that the government's out there facing.
All right.
None of this would work, not unless you have governments that are accountable to their own people. What you have is endless corruption. I mean, can you imagine Côte d'Ivoire? The very poor, very disillusioned, the hungry ones, actually they're seeing their president, seeing their prime minister, seeing all the hang-ons, enjoying themselves, living in a lifestyle which they can only admire, hope, and wish they could be achieving.
All right, Mr. Johnson, let me ask a question. Do you think that leading African nations, the leading ones at least, are they ready to enhance?
British line that's used to avoid the major issue.
Go ahead. I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. Mr. Freeman?
I'm saying that, look, this is the line that's been used. That is corruption, corruption, corruption. We can't do anything. Who taught the people of Africa to be corrupt? It was the British. I've watched it go on in country after country. So let's be honest about who's behind the problem, and instead of blaming the people of Africa, let's actually develop these countries as sovereign, economic, independent countries instead of treating them in the way we have treated them as looting grounds for their natural resources and allowing their populations to die off. That's the policy. That's what's got to be changed. And the corruption issue is not the fundamental issue.
All right, Mr. Johnson, does the political will exist between African nations, leading African nations at least? Can they enhance the economic and security tools, so to say, for their people? Are they ready for the change that Mr. Freeman is saying?
The issues of good governance, human rights, corruption, it needs to be addressed. I think corruption is pivotal. If you bring in millions and millions of dollars into an economy, if half of it is being looted by others and not being used for what it was intended for it to start with, then naturally the economy would not benefit. Also, a lot of the currencies in Africa are very, very weak, and what you find is that they're pegged to the dollar or pegged to other currencies. And when those currencies fail, naturally there's the effect that they would have within their communities, that their currencies would fail as well. So we need currencies that are strong. They need good fiscal policies, and of course, naturally, they need a thriving economy, an economy where people can afford to buy goods and services, and people who work within that economy can actually gain from profit. So the economies of Africa are not really yielding and working in the interest of the people.